Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. It's great to be with you.
So first, I just wanted to start off with, what do you remember most about the moment you found out about your diagnosis?
Ooh. So even though it was now almost 18 years ago, I was the picture of health. I had been in the fight against breast cancer as a state legislator. So, knew a lot about breast cancer and, what risk was and how 1 in 8 women in their lifetimes in America will get breast cancer. But I didn't realize how much I didn't know until I was diagnosed. And when I turned 40, I knew, time to go get the mammogram. And when you turn 40, that's the guidance that they give you. And so I got a mammogram. It came back clean, no evidence of disease, the news that you want. It did say I had some calcifications, but those were not concerning. And, I guess because of those calcifications, I really, a couple of months later, was doing a self-exam, a breast self-exam, which all women should do because we should know what's normal for us, what feels normal for us. So when something feels different, and I am living proof of that. And so I was doing a routine self-exam in the shower, and I found a lump. I found something that I knew had not been there before. And it was really chilling because, I thought everything was okay, and that was weird that I felt that. So I went right to the doctor. Thankfully, I'd had health insurance, so I was able to not even worry about whether I could afford to go to the doctor. And because I was young, and young women have more dense breasts, it's harder to see. My tumor was less than 1/2 centimeter, so it was really small. And I ended up actually having another mammogram, and an ultrasound, and an MRI all in the same day. And I had a biopsy. They had room, and so they put me in surgery for a biopsy that afternoon. When I was in recovery, they said, the margins look clear, everything seems good, we don't think this is anything. Except 3 days later, they always caution you, you have to wait for the pathology to come back. 3 days later, they got the pathology results back, and my doctor called me and said, I'm sorry to share with you, you have breast cancer. And I always describe it as like this anvil, like a crushing weight that just comes down on your chest. And, I felt like my head was turning inside out. I just could not believe it. I'm 41 years old. I have 3 little kids. How could this, I never smoked. I never did anything unhealthy. How could this happen? So when you go through the process of sitting with the nurse navigator, and we can get into that, but it was devastating news because younger women don't get breast cancer as often, but when we do, it's often more aggressive, and there are lots of other challenges that come with it.
So I know in the beginning you did decide to keep your diagnosis private in order to protect your kids, and you really didn't want it to become your identity.
Right.
So what is the biggest challenge you would say that came with keeping it private?
Oh, that I was a very public person. Not being just a normal private citizen who, goes about my day, and, it's just people at work and my family that I was interacting with. When you spend a 15-month period going through breast cancer and all the 7 surgeries that I went through and associated treatments and things like that, and try to keep it private when you're a member of Congress and you're also working on a presidential election, which I was when Barack Obama was running that year. This was in 2008. That was a very major challenge. But because I had all of the surgeries and everything in Washington and not here in South Florida, it made it a little bit easier. And I just put my head down and I organized my life around making sure that I could do what I needed to do to take care of my health and make sure that I could be there fully present for my constituents and for my family. I never missed a vote during the entire 15-month period, and scheduled all the things I needed to do early in the morning or well after work. So thankfully that was possible. But like you said, I didn't. When you have breast cancer, when you have any cancer, everything else fades into the background. You are fully focused on beating the cancer. So I did not want to be, and you don't want to be defined by cancer. And for me, when a reporter would ask me a question, I didn't want to be, if I was talking to you, Madison, and you asked me something, I didn't want you to feel obligated to say, I spoke with Debbie Wasserman Schultz today, who's currently battling breast cancer. You want to be more than the cancer that you're battling. And then also, what every cancer patient will experience is because you lose so much control over your life, because everything is focused on beating cancer. Well-meaning people, if they know, they will decide not to ask you to do something. So they sort of exacerbate the lack of normality. And I wanted to be able to decide how much I was capable of doing, how well I was feeling, what, so that I wanted to keep my life as normal as I could. So that was the other important factor. Aside from the most important thing was to make sure my kids knew that I was going to be okay and not have to worry about that. So I was most concerned about protecting their own well-being.
So as we're discussing, during your treatment, you were balancing motherhood, you were balancing a demanding political career, and also the treatment itself.
Yeah.
So what kept you grounded during that time?
The normalcy of my life. So that it was helpful to be able to deal with it privately so that I could control what was going on around me, and still keep my life as normal as possible. Fly back and forth to Washington, do interviews, campaign for then candidate Obama, and be my kids' mom, and take them to school and help them with their homework, and be able to go out in my district and talk to constituents and handle business by fighting cancer too. But for me, it was extremely important to because my diagnosis became more complicated when after sitting with that nurse navigator and they do an assessment of the cancer in your family tree. I had a couple of great aunts, who were right up the immediate family line. My grandmother's sisters both had breast cancer when in their 40s. And, so me being an Ashkenazi Jewish woman and a Jewish woman of Eastern European descent, having breast cancer in younger women in my family, and in my sort of close-in family tree, they suggested I do a genetic test for the BRCA1 or BRCA2 mutation because what I didn't know, as much as I knew about cancer and the fight against breast cancer, that I had, as an Ashkenazi Jewish woman, I was 5 times more likely to get breast cancer and have a recurrence, and had between a 40 and 85% chance of getting ovarian cancer before I was 50. So I got the genetic test, and it turned out I did have the BRCA2 mutation. So that changed the whole approach to fighting the cancer, because instead of just saying, okay, I have early stage breast cancer, I only needed a lumpectomy and radiation, which was what was recommended. Now I had to deal with, okay, I could very likely have this come back. Do I want to be dealing with an MRI every 6 months for the rest of my life, always waiting for the other shoe to drop? Thankfully, I was at the stage in my life that I had all the kids we planned to have. We had our twins and our younger daughter, and then I had thankfully been able to breastfeed them. So I thank them for their service. And I had a double mastectomy. One was prophylactic, or so I thought, because it turned out I did have breast cancer in both breasts. And later on in the year, I had an oophorectomy, removing my ovaries, so I would really lessen my risk, or eliminate my risk of ovarian cancer.
So you were mentioning some stuff that you might not have known before you got this diagnosis. So looking back, what would you say was like the one thing that you really wish you would have known beforehand?
Well, I wish I would have known that as an Ashkenazi Jewish woman that I had a much higher risk of carrying the genetic mutation. I honestly, again, even though I passed the drive-through mastectomy legislation, the law in Florida that prevents insurance companies from kicking women out of the hospital in less than 24 hours after a double mastectomy. So I had been involved in helping to fight breast cancer. So how did I just had no idea. I'd never heard of BRCA1 or BRCA2. I didn't know there was a genetic mutation that would potentially put me at higher risk. Had I known, I likely would have had a mammogram before I was 40 years old, because I would have asked more questions about my family history, because I knew one of the great aunts had breast cancer. I didn't know both of them did, and I didn't know that until I talked to my mom at the time that they were both in their 40s. So like there were all these red flags that had I known more about my risk, then I would have been able to take steps, and thankfully I caught it early. But if I was dismissed by my doctor and told, like so many young women are, oh, it's probably just a cyst, don't worry about it. They couldn't even really see it on the second mammogram. They couldn't really see it on the ultrasound either. It's only when I got the MRI, and young women often don't get that far. I was a member of Congress, and also, I was pretty insistent about making sure, like, I know what I felt. I could feel it again right there in the doctor's office. And so not all young women are as assertive, and not all women are as assertive. And frankly, young women think they're invincible, and they're not worried or thinking about, a catastrophic disease that might kill them. And we don't want them to, but you want to make sure you're paying attention to your breast health, that you have familiarity with what you feel like, so that if something feels different, because now, all these years later, the percentage increase of young women getting breast cancer has gone up significantly. And so we're seeing more and more breast cancer in young women. So it's just like the one thing that's a thing I wish I would have known. And then secondarily, now that I'm able to use my platform more fully to help other women who might have to deal with breast cancer, I really specifically focus on helping young women know they need to pay attention.
So many women do struggle speaking about their diagnosis. So what gave you the confidence to come out and talk about your diagnosis so openly when you did?
I felt a responsibility as a member of Congress. I knew, even though I felt like I needed to keep my battle during the battle private, and that was the most effective way I could get through it for me personally, I knew I would use my platform to help other women once I was all the way through. And I had the confidence from the doctors that I was taking the steps necessary to really dramatically reduce my risk. So I just felt a responsibility to be able to make sure that I could find what's the void, what's the niche that I could fill. I mean, I'm of course always supportive of more funding for cancer research, although that's under attack right now by this administration. Donald Trump has canceled hundreds of millions of dollars in cancer research, for universities just like NSU, and so that's really concerning. But I wanted to make sure that I could find the void. What's the most significant gap, and how can I help fill it? And the organizations that we talked to in my quest to figure out, what's the first big thing that I can do to make a difference when I shared my story, was that young women's breast cancer was not getting enough attention. So I introduced the EARLY Act, which was the Breast Health Education and Awareness Requires Learning Young Act. And it created a national education and awareness campaign targeted at young women. It's at the Centers for Disease Control. It's called Bring Your Brave. And so you can go on the Bring Your Brave website, and there's an app that you can download. You can determine your risk. You can learn about that. For example, the symptoms for young women when they have breast cancer aren't always the same, as often are not the same as for older women. And doctors, as I said, are dismissive of younger women oftentimes and think, it's just a cyst and, come back in 6 months. Only they come back in 6 months and they have much more complicated breast cancer than catching it early would have resulted in. So, and then we also included an education program focused on healthcare providers so that they would be more likely to think about a young woman presenting with a concern about her breasts and the possibility that it was breast cancer, and grant funding for organizations that help young women deal with the unique challenges, and women of higher risk, because not only do Ashkenazi Jewish women are we more likely to have the genetic mutation, but for example, Black women are less likely to get breast cancer, but more likely to get a vicious form of breast cancer called triple negative, and it's much tougher to treat. Again, caught early with diligence on paying attention to your breast health, it can be beaten. And Hispanic women are more likely to get cervical cancer, and both groups are more likely to die of cancer, even if they're less likely to get it. So that kind of focused attention was what I wanted to use my platform for.
So how has survivorship changed your day-to-day life, both mentally and physically?
Yeah, no matter how far out you are from having breast cancer, I think about it every single day. I mean, I have physical manifestations, obviously, that remind me every day. And no matter how much confidence my doctors gave me that I did everything I needed to beat it and to remain cancer-free, I still take a medication that gives me at least somewhat of a shield. I took tamoxifen for 10 years, and now I take a different medication so that I can, because some of those medications, if you take them too long, actually make other cancers more likely. But the survivorship in particular is really such a wilderness. It's a wild west. Once you have very focused attention and very specific instructions, be here for this treatment, get this surgery, take these steps. And then when your active treatment is done and you've rung that bell and you're ready to go and move on with your life as a survivor, there's a very different landscape that survivors start down the pathway into. And so I have launched a Cancer Survivorship Summit, hosted right here at NSU for the first two, and we will continue this coming year because we really want to make sure, and I introduced legislation called the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act that helps make sure that we really revamp and structure a pathway for survivors to walk down so that your geography, your socioeconomic status, who you are, the kind of cancer you had, that no one misses the guidance and that there are protocols in place to help everyone begin their cancer survivorship journey and know what they're at risk of, know what kind of screenings that they should definitely continue with, make sure that they can adopt a healthy lifestyle. I taught myself to cook when I could scramble eggs and boil water, and that was it, because I really realized after a couple of years, I have to really control what I'm putting in my body. I really ate like poop. It was not good, and I became concerned, not only about the weight gain that my medicine caused, but also about, wow, I just shouldn't be eating peanut M&Ms and a full-strength Coke for breakfast anymore. That's probably unwise as a cancer survivor or at all. So now I am a clean cooking fanatic, and in fact, if anyone wants to follow my Clean Cooking Congresswoman Instagram account, they can feel free. They want to get some inspiration, but I found inspiration from the clean cooking community on Instagram.
Wow. So how do you hope that your openness inspires others that are going through their journey right now?
The most gratifying thing since I was all done with my active treatment is when any person comes up to me, or any woman in particular, and I've had young women and older women who will have heard my story and me talk about it, and they knew they had an issue, or they were sort of beyond 40 years old and had not been to their first mammogram. A lot of women are afraid to have their boobs squished, and it's just not that big a deal. It really doesn't hurt that much. It's uncomfortable, but it is so critical. If I had not had that first mammogram, my antenna would not have been raised, even though there was no evidence of disease that came back from my first one. And I never had another one again because I had breast cancer a couple months later. So it's just so important. We should not dismiss our health. Women so often take care of everyone else except ourselves, and that is a trait that every time I say it to a crowd of women, I get all the knowing nods, and I'm getting one from you too. But it just fills my heart when someone says, I got a mammogram that I had been putting off. And even though it's sad because sometimes they'll tell me they found breast cancer, they know that it would have been a lot later had I not been able to sort of wake them up and bring it to their attention. So any difference I can make like that, it's all worth it.
So what do you hope that people take away, not just from your journey like with cancer, but really like living with resilience and afterwards?
I mean, everyone is different. I am the kind of person, I compartmentalize. So, I mean, some people just drown in what they're going through, and I'm someone who's fortunate that I can compartmentalize and I can, focus on tasks that are at hand in multiple different ways. Sometimes simultaneously, sometimes one at a time. But focusing on when you have a diagnosis like that, focusing on getting well has to be your first priority. And, you've got to do whatever you need to do to be able to get well and structure things around you. And look, everybody has a different situation. I was very fortunate. I have now been married to my husband for almost 35 years, and I have an incredibly supportive family. Not everybody, that's what's also important to recognize. I was able to have a relatively soft landing because I had the resources, I had health insurance coverage. I didn't have to worry about any of those things. And there are lots and lots of people who don't have that stability. So there are resources out in the community that are available that can help you get through it. The Broward Community Family Health Center, BCAM here in Broward is incredibly supportive. Our cancer centers that are here, we really have excellent resources, and we need to continue. I'll tell you from my standpoint right now, what is very critical is that we not allow the Affordable Care Act tax credits to expire, because we have really millions of people in this state who that's where they get their health care coverage from, and it's what helps keep their health care coverage affordable. When you don't have health coverage and you have to use the emergency room as your primary access point, I can't imagine if I would have had to wait till I had an emergency to first go to the doctor after I found that lump, instead of being able to go right when I found it. I might not be sitting here with you today. So reaching out and being your own healthcare advocate is really important. And trying to, even if you don't have supportive family. I had my closest girlfriends come up and help take care of me after my mastectomy, and as resilient as I am, that is not a fun experience, and it is one in which you definitely need help in the immediate aftermath of the surgery. So don't be afraid to ask for help, and really try to build a support team around you.
Any last thoughts?
Pay attention to your breast health. Early detection is the key to survival. 99% of breast cancers that are localized, that don't spread to other parts of the body or the lymph nodes, are curable. We now have nearly 100% of women who find their tumor smaller than a centimeter, and they survive. So don't wait.